Hey everyone! In the last video I made dedicated to Metroid Prime 4, I had just seen the trailer from the Switch 1 Direct, and I wasn't entirely sold. I did have some concerns that I wanted to share. Well, I'm thrilled to say that now, most of these concerns have actually been addressed. The Switch 2 is getting its own edition of Metroid Prime 4, and it looks positively brilliant. It goes beyond just being able to choose between HDR and 120 frames per second, and don't get me wrong, being able to choose either of those is going to make for a very, very appealing game, graphically. But there's also the lighting effects, the particle effects, the textures. The Switch 1 version already looked great, but the Switch 2 version that we're being shown now looks truly next level. It's shaping up to quite possibly be the most visually stunning game ever released as a first-party Nintendo title. In addition, the gameplay shown of the introduction area during the Nintendo Treehouse really showcased more of a chaotic, intense, and battle-filled environment than what the trailer featured in the Switch 1 Direct in the early stages of Planet Veros really showed us. So after seeing all of this, I'm starting to really have no doubt that this game is going to progress into a highly engaging title with tons of surprises awaiting us. But today, specifically, I want to share with you 3 key details that I noticed when watching through all of the trailers and gameplay footage so far that there's a decent chance you very well may have missed. Let's jump in and take a look. First, we're going to be talking about an energy tank. Yes, the energy tank in the introduction area on planet Tanimar. So during the Nintendo Treehouse gameplay footage, you can see that in this one section, Samus goes into Morph Ball form, goes through a long, kind of windy overhead area, and eventually arrives at an energy tank that she collects. Now, why I find this interesting is because normally in the Metroid games, if they have an introductory area, it cannot be returned to. For example, think about the research station in Super Metroid and the frigate in Metroid Prime. So if you can't return to an introductory area, if you don't collect a collectible there, you're not going to be able to get 100% in the game. You'll essentially be soft-locked out of it. And that obviously would not be a good state to be in. So it actually at first made me wonder, since there's a collectible in the introductory area here in Metroid Prime 4, does this imply that interplanetary travel is possible, similar to what we saw in Metroid Prime 3? But hang on, you might be asking, is it even possible to avoid this energy tank? This is something we also saw in Metroid Prime 3, where there was an energy tank early on in the game that was not possible to avoid. It does appear, when taking a closer look, that since you are being forced to enter a Morph Ball tunnel with no obvious ways around, and really no way to escape the tunnel, that it's kind of a foregone conclusion that you're going to have to collect the energy tank. Now, you do lay bombs when you're going through the tunnel and blow up some of these vent box things, and it looks like there might be little side openings that you can roll out of to get out of the tunnel. So there might be a way to avoid the energy tank that way, but I wouldn't count on it. So perhaps this is actually just a question of low percenting the game. How few items can you actually complete the game with? Now, typically in Metroid games, you are not forced to collect energy tanks, with Metroid Prime 3 being one exception. But still, for this one, will someone find a way to avoid this energy tank? Will there perhaps be an out-of-bounds glitch that can be used to circumvent it? I'm not entirely sure, but I will say here, it still feels like a really odd design choice to me to place a game collectible in an area that you cannot backtrack to. Even if there isn't supposed to be a way to circumvent the collectible, it might still be possible. Even if the game designers tried to put it on the required path, it could still be possible, and it just seems like a really odd design choice if there was no way to return to this area. So I'm not sure, but this is giving me a little bit of reason to believe that there might be interplanetary travel, or it could very well just be a case of I'm overthinking this. It's a collectible on the fixed required path, and you get it and move on, and there's nothing else to think about here. I'm not sure. I guess we'll see about this one. The next thing I want to share is a case of disappearing missiles. So in the introduction area, we have 30 missiles, the charge beam, morph ball, bombs, and space jump. At least that's what I noticed when watching through. It's completely possible that there's some other power-ups that are visible that I just didn't notice, but those are the main ones that I saw. But then on planet Veros, and we can see this when we move to the Switch 1 Direct footage from March 27th, we can see on planet Veros that we still have the extra energy tank that we acquired. But the missiles, they at first are nowhere to be found, and then later we see that Samus has a missile capacity of 10, not 30. This means either Samus lost 20 missiles from her capacity, or entirely lost the missile launcher and had to reacquire it. And why I find this weird is it appears to me that you still have all your other power-ups. You know, it's a common thing to do in Metroid games where after the introductory area, you lose all your power-ups and have to reacquire them. Well, I'm guessing that you still have your charge beam, as the trailer shows you blasting away debris using the charge beam in an area I can only assume is very soon after you arrive on the planet. A clip later on shows using the Morph Ball, and you also have bombs at that point. And this is before acquiring a second energy tank, and presumably also before acquiring multiple missile expansions. Because if you look at the footage of the Carvex battle, you do have a second energy tank, but you still have 10 missiles. So since presumably this Morph Ball footage occurs before you get a second energy tank or multiple missile expansions, I can only assume that you didn't lose your Morph Ball or bombs either, because it seems unlikely you'd get both of those back before a second energy tank or multiple missile expansions. And Space Jump, which we saw featured during the Nintendo Treehouse during the Aberax battle, being used to jump over waves of energy, it's possible that you lost that, but you probably didn't, because if you look at Metroid Prime 3, all of these abilities were present from the start of that game, except for the missile launcher, but you had Space Jump, you had Morph Ball, you had bombs, you had Charge Beam. So if this is the case and you didn't actually lose these power-ups, why did the missile count drop from 30 down to 10? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. It seems kind of arbitrary just to drop the missile count down slightly. What we do see is after Sylux shoots the artifact, and we don't really know what the artifact is. It seems to be something of great importance, obviously, with all this battle going on to procure it. But after Sylux shoots this artifact, it just kind of glows and floats, and then appears to transport Samus to planet Viros. But why, during this transportation, would 20 missiles disappear, but none of Samus's other abilities? It seems like a very strange and arbitrary decision. So one explanation is that Retro wanted you to be highly equipped for the intro, because you can see when watching the Nintendo Treehouse that there's a lot of combat taught here, and so 30 missiles is useful for learning combat, but they decided that 30 missiles would make you overpowered at the proper start of the game on Viros, and so they took some away. But another explanation, if you believe she lost 20 missiles but not the entire launcher, is that really just the starting missile count is being tweaked in different builds of the game, and maybe it hasn't been finalized yet. But it will be, and the number will remain consistent from Tanimar to Viros when the actual game comes out later this year. I'm not sure, but it is very strange to see 20 missiles disappear but nothing else. Feels very arbitrary. And the next thing I want to talk about is the lore of the game and the fifth dimension. So this is something you probably did notice when watching through the trailers and gameplay footage, but when Samus is transported to planet Viros, she appears to undergo some sort of transformation herself as well. You can see the green accents on her suit turn purple, and then her beam also turns from its standard yellow color into more of a purple, almost like a wave beam sort of color. And then also, Samus gets this very interesting purple button thing on her helmet, right around her forehead. What does all of this mean? What does this transformation mean? Clearly this is some sort of transformation caused by the artifact from Tanimar. Clearly it's an artifact of great importance that, this war was being fought to try to procure it. Now, one of the more obvious interpretations would be that these transformations are related to her psychic abilities somehow. And they might be. But if you listen to the narrator during the Switch 1 Direct trailer, what he says is, as she explores the planet, Samus is granted mysterious and ancient powers, psychic abilities. So it's while she explores the planet, she is granted these powers. So that implies that she did not have these powers when she was transported to Viros, even though you can see that she's underwent the physical transformations as soon as she arrives on Viros. So what was it that actually granted her the psychic abilities? Presumably, it would be the spirit featured in the trailer that calls Samus the Chosen One. That would make sense to me that that's the thing that actually granted the psychic abilities. And it may still be related to the transformation that Samus underwent. It may have just laid the groundwork. But yeah, clearly she doesn't have the psychic abilities yet, and there is actually something, some entity, probably the spirit that I mentioned, on Viros that actually does grant the psychic abilities later on. Now, if we want to go further here, analyzing the exact choice of words made by the narrator in the trailer, we get another interesting line here, where he says, "And what will be her fate after being summoned to Viros?" Note the word summoned in here, summoned to Vuros. This implies that it wasn't a chance accident, that after Sylux shot the artifact, that Samus just happened to be transported to Vuros. Summoned implies that some entity explicitly chose to bring her to the planet. Again, it would be my guess that it would be the spirit featured in the trailer that called her the Chosen One, that chose to bring her to the planet. But then this does suggest that this artifact back on Tanamar ties into the spirit somehow, and the spirit had knowledge of it, and the spirit had knowledge of Samus. It does open up a lot of questions and makes you ask why. Why does the spirit want Samus to come to Vuros? But there's one more line from the narrator, and personally I find this one to be the most interesting. He says, "The threads intertwining beyond space and time are beginning to weave a new tale." And so there's the word, the title of the game, Beyond. But he says beyond space and time. What does that mean? So if you think about space and time, that already implies 4 dimensions, right? Space being 3 dimensions, time being the 4th dimension. And so if you're going beyond that, because he says beyond space and time, you're now talking about 5 dimensions. So what is the 5th dimension? Well, if I turn to Google and trust its AI, it tells me, in physics and mathematics, the 5th dimension refers to an extra dimension of space beyond the 3 we perceive, proposed to help unify gravity and electromagnetism, and potentially explain other phenomena. Okay, that's getting pretty deep, and I can only assume that Retro and Nintendo did not want to limit appreciating the lore of the game to those with advanced physics degrees, so that's probably not what they mean by beyond space and time. But what it might mean, or what a 5th dimension might mean, is something a little easier to conceptualize, like perhaps being in an afterlife, which is a theory I've already seen online, where Samus actually dies from this encounter with Sylux and needs to discover how to resurrect herself somehow so she can save the world. But that's not the only interpretation. Perhaps it refers to independent worlds, where Samus is now in a world safe from Sylux's influence, and she can power up and go about her business until she's ready to return to the real world where Sylux has obtained the artifact, and then she can defeat him. Or perhaps it refers to parallel universes, where there exist both universes where Sylux has obtained the artifact, and universes where he has failed, and Samus can power herself up while alternating between these different realities. Whatever the case is, and the real case may very well be none of these theories, this game has clearly set itself up for some very intriguing lore, and the transformations that we saw in Samus when she was transported, or summoned, to Vuros, seems to be at the foundation of all of it. So what are your thoughts on all of this? Do you think we will be able to return to planet Tanamar later in the game? Why does Samus lose 20 missiles when she goes to Vuros, but seemingly nothing else? What is implied by Samus's transformation, and what is meant by beyond space and time? Are there other interesting details you have noted that I haven't mentioned here? But you know, no matter what, I am really pumped up for this game and can't wait until it arrives on the Switch 2. But we're still missing the date. What date is this game going to launch? Given that all of Nintendo's upcoming summer releases got exact dates, and Pokémon Legends ZA was announced as late 2025, I would assume that Prime 4's simple 2025 date implies a September release, in between summer and late 2025. So until I hear otherwise, I've got the whole month of September circled on my calendar. Anyway, that's all for now. Please like and subscribe if you like this video, and I'll see you later. Bye for now.